Yeah, and I think one of the things that works for us is not being afraid of failure. We take a lot of risks, and if it doesn't work, we just, dust our feet and move on. We don't take failure hard, but we try to learn from it.
Scratch Entrepreneur. True stories of remarkable people who dropped everything to turn an idea into a healthy, profitable business. Have you ever experienced failure? Maybe it was in your business, your personal life, or just inside yourself. Something you were excited to do, well prepared for, and then it just flopped. I have. A million times I have. Small failures, big failures. I've got a smorgasbord of failures, just like my attempt at saying that word. For this episode, I had another one. It was pretty epic. Today's guests are a couple that's world-renowned in the field of graphic design. They've worked for some of the biggest design agencies in the world, advised some of the best companies, studied under legends in their field, spoken in front of huge audiences, and built a huge following of other graphic designers. They themselves have now become a powerhouse couple in their field. So I was excited to even get the interview. I thought through hundreds of questions and different lines of conversation. But when they actually sat down, I performed like this. Armin, can you say test 1, 2?
Test 1, 2, test 1, 2.
And I guess I'm just going to do this because I can't hear. I'm going to stop you because this card just got full. So anything you say, as much as I love it, won't get recorded anyway. Man, I usually have much fewer technical issues, but this is the way it goes, right?
Yeah.
I don't know how painful that was for you, but for a podcaster, that's as embarrassing as it gets. The microphones didn't work, the recording device was full, and I looked like a fool. By the end of the interview, Armin Vit and Bryony Gomez-Palacio, owners of the graphic design firm under consideration, were sharing a single microphone that was barely picking up. I failed, plain and simple. But you can't fail if you don't try, or as Winston Churchill said, success is stumbling from failure to failure with no loss of enthusiasm. And my failure in successfully performing a professional interview is actually really in line with what I learned from Armin and Bryony. They're rather attracted to failure, or rather to trying and trying again with no loss of enthusiasm. Here's the story of design firm under consideration and their blog and design conference, brand new. We're glad you joined us. So let's dig in a little bit to talking about brand and talking about graphic design. I mean, you guys spend a lot of time talking about that all the time, I know. But for someone for someone like me who 5 years ago was establishing a brand, I'm not a graphic designer. I'm a business person trying to do business stuff. I understand art and I love the artistic experience of design. What are some of the first things I should really think about when I'm thinking about visual brand?
Yes, I think it's about having the visual tools to easily and consistently communicate who you are, what you stand for, what people should expect from you as a business. So, if I go to your website for the very first time, what is it that as a potential client, customer, or whatever, what is it that I'm going to take away right away? Am I going to see, am I going to get a sense that there's quality behind this, that it's an established company? So whenever you have bad design, and we all see it. We all know bad design when we see it. Even if you're not a graphic designer, some things just look crappier than others.
Yeah.
Something makes you buy one box of tissues over another.
Yeah, but it's like, what's at the heart of that? What is it that makes us, I totally agree, right? I look at something, I'm like, yeah, that's me. I like that. I connect. I look at something else and I'm like, no, that's not me. And sometimes it's just because it's old but have you tapped into the why a little bit of why something attracts us so much?
No, but I think that's the sort of magic about it, and I don't mean that in a way that what we do is magical and no one gets it. But I think there is something that designers are able to do, which is by balancing color, typography, hierarchy, texture of things, that it taps into, something really, deep inside people. They're like, oh, this feels right. Yeah. This seems balanced. This seems coherent. This seems something that looking at it, I enjoy looking at it, and I don't know why, but that's fine. Like, you don't have a reaction like,
Yeah.
So I think that's what graphic designers are good at, into bringing together those elements in a way that is pleasing, effective, and somehow, magically or not magically, is able to communicate something about the client.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and I think that, when you look at movies, you look at magazines, you look at books, you're constantly bombarded by all of this imagery, and you start to make your own deductions about what is quality, what isn't, what is dark, what is old, what is new, what speaks to your own personality. Yeah. And so when you see graphic design, you're reacting based on all of this information that's already in your brain, that you've already processed, that you've already categorized. Mm-hmm. And so when you see a new website, you're tapping into that and, interpreting it based on your own experiences and what you've been taught.
Yeah, I guess it's just like any other art form, any other creativity. Like, I'm asking the wrong question. Like, what's the magic thing behind it? Well, it depends on who your audience is, right? Like, what's the magic thing behind classical music or Metallica or hip hop or whatever it is in the music world? Well, it's that a listener and an artist connect with each other, and that's true in architecture and in visual art and in graphic design as well.
Yeah, and a successful graphic design might not communicate with you, but you're not the audience. Mm-hmm. They're communicating with another group that is who they're after. Yeah. And then, the same can happen with positive or negative reactions towards graphic design.
Yeah, and I guess that's the key back to the business owner what does the business owner need to do? They need to understand their ideal client, and then they need to find a graphic designer that also understands their ideal client and knows how to connect. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think it's also an understanding that that there are different ways of communicating. There isn't just like a right or wrong solution. And sometimes business owners, they have in their mind, oh, this needs to be a certain way. And it doesn't always have to be that way. And sometimes a graphic designer will be able to advise whether that is the right or wrong approach. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think there's a lot of good design always comes from a good collaboration between a business owner and the designer, in that they're able to talk to each other, and one of them is not imposing the other's point of view, like too harshly, but being open about, okay, you tell me what you know about your audience, and I'll tell you what I think. I'll translate that, and I'll try to figure out what is the best approach to communicate consistently with that audience.
Yeah, so a good client is one that listens, but is also clear about what they want.
Yeah, which is really, it sounds so simple, but it's so difficult to find.
Yeah. What's a bad client look like?
One that changes their mind over and over again or is easily swayed by what other people are saying. Yeah. So if you'll show them something and then they'll show it to their spouse or their family member or coworker, and then they have an opinion, and then they're like, oh no, this is all wrong because this, this other person created doubt. Uh-huh. I would think that is kind of like my nightmare client.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's like almost like the wedding industry, right? Where you have multiple people telling the bride, for example, just all these different things, and then it becomes convoluted. I get that.
Yeah, and it happens a lot where, talking about logos, for example, you'll show a client 5 logos, and they're like, no, none of them like it. And you're like, well, maybe I did something wrong. So you go back to the drawing board and show them another 5. And like, no, not yet. So there's something where they're not communicating something to you that somehow you're not able to meet their needs or extract what they're after.
Right.
And it's usually a case of somebody going like, oh, I'll know it when I see it. Like, no, you have to know what you're looking for. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep showing you stuff that is unrelated, that is not on target. So most difficult clients are the ones that don't have a clear idea. And it's not that they have to say, oh, I want this specific font at this specific size paired with an icon of a mermaid. Like it's my job to figure that out.
Yeah.
But it's your job to be convinced about what you want to communicate. And it's very common to find business owners that are not sure what that is, whether by circumstance or because they're stubborn.
I want to go backwards just a little bit and start kind of from the beginning. And is there a moment in each one of your like childhoods that kind of made you who you were today, if you look back?
Oh, absolutely. I was raised by a writer / lawyer and a fine artist, so I was always surrounded by creative endeavors, and that pretty much shaped what we have today as under consideration.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, me as a child, there was nothing that would indicate that I would turn out to do something worthy of note. When I was a kid, I was just interested in video games, wrestling, and basketball. Anything beyond that was boring, and I was a really lazy kid. So it was really later on that I caught on to something. But yeah, as a kid, there was nothing that would indicate anything about my future.
So Bryony, you grew up in kind of a creative environment. So you had a childhood that fostered that. And for you, Armin, it really wasn't something you were thinking about in the future. So I guess let's start with you. What set off the spark? Like at what point did you realize that you had creativity inside of you?
I would say it was until like midway through college where I started studying graphic design, and I went into graphic design because it seemed the path of least resistance, where maybe I wouldn't have to memorize things, I wouldn't have to take tests that would be difficult. So I went into it because I thought it's something that looked like I could do. I could doodle the Metallica logo on my high school notebook, so I figured there was something there. And eventually, like the first 2 years into it, we designed our first like business card and letterhead and logo. And we're like, oh wow, this is fun. I'm sort of good at it. I was a student, so it wasn't that much. It wasn't a great design, but it was, for me, it was remarkable that I was able to do something remotely creative. So from there, it was like, okay, I'm good at this, and I don't have to memorize things or take tests for it, so I'm going to stick with it. Even going into it with my low expectations, I came out loving it. And once I realized that that's what I like doing, I just went full in.
And so how did you come into it, Bryony?
Well, as I said, I was always surrounded by creativity, but graphic design was not really on my radar until pretty much the end of high school, where the art teacher was actually a graphic designer. And in one of the projects, she started talking to me about graphic design and saying, maybe this is what you want to do, because I was looking at architecture at that point. I have lots of architects in my family as well. Yeah. And she showed me a little bit about graphic design, and it was just a spark again. Just that looks interesting. That looks fascinating. And then from there, I started working with her on some side projects. I did a mini sort of internship with her, and then that was it. I fell in love with it.
So if someone would have asked you when you were 15 what you were going to grow up to be, what would you have said?
Probably an architect, and I was also a ballerina.
Okay, cool. How about you, Armin?
I was also going to be a ballerina.
Right on. Yeah. Perfect.
No, at 15, I really could not think. I mean, if there had been an option to be a pro video gamer at that time, because now it's a thing. Like now, kids can go into video games and be professionals, and there's like a sports league for them. Yeah. So if that had been an option, it would have been impossible to convince my parents that that's what I wanted to do. But given how I was really good at video games, like I was the best in my group of friends. So if that could have been a career path at that point, I would have taken it for sure.
Not even using cheat codes from the magazines that you got at the bookstores.
No, it was the real deal.
Okay, cool. So ultimately, you all did go into graphic design. Did you meet each other? I guess the better question is, when did you two meet each other?
So we were both studying graphic design at different universities in Mexico City, which is where we grew up. And there, the moment you graduate from high school, you go straight into a career. There's no you don't have those transition years in college where you try to figure out what you're going to major in. You apply for the university to go into graphic design.
So
And-
like in high school, you're not applying like here we sort of apply to a college and we don't necessarily know what we want to do.
Oh no,
there.
here you know exactly what career you want to, and what semester you're going to start in what university.
So when does that pressure start? It seems like there's a lot of pressure to decide at an earlier age.
About 11th grade, you must figure it out because some colleges require certain GPAs and certain requirements outside of school as well.
Yeah, like in the last year of high school, you had to pick an area. So you either go into like the administrative
Humanities.
business area, or humanities and arts, or science. I don't even remember what I picked.
Yeah, so your senior year, you're already, challenged. Basically, your senior year is kind of like your first year of college.
Yeah.
In the way that you're already gearing towards something and you're getting a little bit of taste of everything within that area.
Is it harder to change? Like if you're 18, 19 in your second year, third year of college and you decide, well, that's not the thing I wanted to do. I want to go over to this other direction.
On average, every career is 5 years long. So if you want to switch, you go back to square one.
Oh, wow.
So you'll go to university for 7 years or 8 years or however long you want to, as long as you keep changing.
Wow. Okay, so you both, one way or another, ended up in the graphic design world in Mexico City studying to be graphic designers. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. How'd you meet?
We met through mutual friends in a nightclub past midnight at some point.
And it was funny because it was Valentine's Day, or it was
Weekend.
Valentine's Day weekend.
Yeah.
And me and a friend had said, if we don't have dates, we're not going to go out.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, we didn't have dates.
But you still went out.
But we still went out. We said, well, let's just drink and have fun, and so I was drinking, having fun, and I had enough drinks where I had I could muster up the courage to
right,
speak to a young woman,
Yeah.
and she would talk back to me, and next thing you know, we're talking until like 5 in the morning, 6 in the morning.
Well, your ride left you, and
Yeah.
so I took you home, and we realized he lived like 5 minutes away from me. So that was
that's
a
cool.
nice benefit to have in Mexico City.
Absolutely. So then you all had met, and eventually the story takes us to the United States. Is that correct? So
Correct.
How does that happen?
So I was studying graphic design in the university there, and I loved graphic design, but I hated the university. Graphic design was very young in Mexico City at that point, and I was being taught graphic design by either non-practicing designers or architects and artists who had ended up doing some graphic design. And there was a lack of seriousness amongst my peers. Because of students like Armin who thought, this is the path of least resistance. I'll do this for a little while. And so I was becoming very frustrated. I ended up moving to Atlanta in Georgia to study at Portfolio Center, where I found that challenge between my peers and the teachers that I so craved.
Yeah.
And so when Armin finished, he wrote his thesis and graduated. He joined me, and that's how we ended up on this side of the border.
So right about here is where the recording stopped for a few minutes. What I lost was Armin and Bryony describing exponential career growth from the moment they entered the field. Bryony was academic and intelligent in her design work, and Armin was equally exceptional but with more whimsy and creative freedom. They had come to the United States on a limited work visa, but they fell in love with the creative environment, and the U.S. design world took a liking to them as well. Eventually, both accepted visas that allowed them to stay in the U.S. and move from Atlanta to design firms in Chicago. A few years later, Armin landed a gig at one of the world's largest design firms, New York City-based Pentagram, and Bryony took a job at a firm on Wall Street. In a few short years, Armin and Bryony had reached what many designers see as their industry's mountaintop, working in the heart of the design world on major projects for huge corporations with large budgets. But that, of course, is not the end of our story. When we come back, we'll talk about why Bryony and Armin left everything they had to start their own thing called Under Consideration. So you guys are working in New York City. You both have great jobs there, and then you decide to move into something of your own. Can you describe a little bit why you made that decision and how it happened?
Sure. I was working in Wall Street, specializing in annual reports, and I ended up leaving that to start under consideration while Armin still had this amazing job and a steady paycheck, so that we could start to get our own clients, do some freelance work, and basically start a family at the same time. So I was working from home, and we had our first child in April 2007, and Armin's firm opted to give him paternity leave, which was 3 months at half pay, and that was the biggest mistake they made, I think.
Yeah, I don't think they even realized that they had such a policy. Another designer that was on my same team, they had their kid the same week or month as we did. So he found out about the 3-month paternity leave. I thought it was going to be 2 weeks. So when they told me 3 months at half pay, I was like, sure, I'll take it. So I take my 3 months off. Well, newborn baby. I mean, it's not great because you're not sleeping, you're changing diapers, you have no idea what's going on with this living thing that you have in your house, but still there's that instant connection. So fine, great. I go back after 3 months, and a week back into it, I'm miserable. Like all I'm thinking is I want to get out of here, as soon as I can. I don't want to be stuck here at the office late at night. I just want to be home with this living thing that poops and cries and all that.
Absolutely.
So I think a month after being back in, then Bryony and I talked about I said like I think I want to quit Pentagram. That was the name, and she was like, yeah, I kind of like got that. So we just on.
So this was at our little coffee shop, and we used a paper bag from the muffin that we had purchased to draft our business plan. And we figured, okay, these are the projects that we have. This is the invoices that we have outstanding for the next 6 months. We can survive on this, and then in those 6 months, we have to figure out what the next 6 months and moving forward would be. And we still have our little business plan somewhere in a folder. But that's how it all really started.
And so what's the... Like, for someone who doesn't know under consideration, how would you describe what you guys do?
So our elevator pitch is we're a graphic design firm that does limited work for clients, but we have our own initiatives and projects. And that stems from the fact that we started blogging back in 2003, back before it was cool, and we've been doing it after it's not cool anymore. Because people don't say, I blog. People just have websites that have news items on them. But we've been blogging for a long time, and that opened up possibilities for... So we built an audience by generating content that was related to the graphic design world. So all of a sudden, we have this great audience, and we have this ability to, come up with our own projects and have a dedicated audience that will enjoy them and use them. So that's where we make the difference. That's where we're very clear to make the distinction that we are a graphic design firm, but unlike most graphic design firms, we do a lot of our living and time comes from and is spent on our own initiatives.
And I should clarify that most of these initiatives are geared towards this audience that Armin speaks of, but it's an audience of graphic designers.
Under Consideration functioned as a traditional design firm, creating logos, websites, brand initiatives, and everything else for business owners that were their clients. But the blog presence kept growing. There was a larger and larger audience that was made up of other designers looking for leadership, ideas, and a community. Armin and Bryony saw the potential and had an idea.
We had just moved from New York to Austin and seeking a kind of calmer life. And this is right when the economy tanked in 2009. And all of our projects dried up, and all clients said, thank you, we're going to figure out things on our own for a little bit because graphic design is to an extent expendable, or, you can postpone it a year. That website does not need to be done right now. And so we found ourselves in Austin, basically with no clients, no projects, nothing, and new mortgage, baby and a half, and something needed to happen. And so we decided to start the brand new conference and kind of like risk it all and said, if this doesn't work, well, then we'll have to find jobs somewhere else and start anew. But it worked.
Yeah, so we announced it on our blog and said when we started small, we thought let's start with a small auditorium. I think it was 250 people. No,
No, for 150.
no, that was the later one because we sold out of the first
Okay.
one. Yeah, so there was this auditorium that had one venue that had two auditoriums, a small one and a big one. Not knowing what to expect, we went with the small one. We announced it, and we had great speakers, like people that people in the industry look up to, and we look up to them.
Yeah.
Next thing you know, in a matter of 2-3 weeks, we sell out. So we're like, hey, venue, can we switch to the bigger auditorium, which was 450 people? And they're like, yeah, sure. And
Yeah.
then 2-3 weeks later, we sell out of that one. So we're like, oh, okay, people are into this. Let's see what happens. So we do the conference. And people just love it. They go, I mean, not to say bad words, but they do go batshit crazy. Like at the after party, people are like, oh my God, that was amazing. I hope you keep doing it. And
What was so amazing? What were they saying was so amazing about it?
I think it was just the content, the fact that this specific group of people for this specific topic came together for one single day.
Yeah.
It had never happened before. So I think it was just a very rewarding and very gratifying and very satisfying. Like it was a big creative punch for a lot of people.
Yeah,
And I think
yeah.
there was a level of geekery, like, these people on stage speak my language. I really care about this specific area of graphic design, and this is what I'm getting. And everybody around me is just obsessed with this small part of graphic design. I'm not the only one. That was amazing.
Yeah, and nobody else. My family never wants to talk about this thing that I'm totally obsessed with, and now suddenly there are 450 people and my icons in this world all getting together, and that had not happened before.
Yeah, so I think that's where a lot of the enthusiasm came.
The brand new conference took hold from there. Every year, designers infatuated with brand identity get together in a different town to celebrate their craft and hear from leaders in their field. The first couple of years, it was 500 people for one day. Then they expanded to 1,000 people for 2 days, each year growing and experimenting with new things. A couple of years in, Armin and Bryony decided to add a little artistic flair with an idea that would become one of the highlights of the conference. You have this graphic design, this digital type of design conference, and one of the things the two of you decided to do for these conferences was specifically to go to almost the physical art world and create these dynamic badges, like the thing you get at the front desk when you first get to a conference, and like the bag, the thing that has like the stuff in it for the conference. So every conference I've ever been to, you get the badge and maybe it has your name on it. Maybe you like have to handwrite it with Sharpie. And then the bag is, whatever somebody donated or whatnot. You guys really took that to a different level. Can you describe that a little bit?
Well, we are designing for graphic designers, so that is a challenge in itself.
Yeah.
You want to push the boundaries a little bit, and we have a little bit of freedom to push those boundaries. And most people love it, and every now and then there's somebody who really hates it. But in the end, we are tangible people, and we like to touch things and feel things. And so, having something that you can hold in your hands and then see people leave that in the trash or in the hotel room just breaks my heart and Armin's heart. So between that and wanting to have top quality things, we took it to the next level where we were trying to personalize things and do things in a different way. And it all started with one of the programs where we die cut little holes on all of the covers, and then I embroidered 800 of those so that each program was different. And that, people were very interested in that. And all of a sudden, there's a very personal connection between us, the organizers, hosts of the conference, and every attendee. And so when we saw that, every year you take it to the next level.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the first year that we did something like that, so the embroidery one, that was 2011, 2012. Sorry, and this was also back when Instagram wasn't such a big deal. But that time we also did the name badges that were in yellow acrylic and they were laser cut with a logo. And then like 10 or 12 people posted it on Instagram, and that was a huge deal. That 12 people went online and bragged about this batch
Yeah.
that they were getting. And for us, it was like a thrill. Like, oh, people really love it, and they love it so much that they're putting it on Instagram. Now it's, people put everything on Instagram.
Yeah.
But we saw it as a point of, all right, we have designer audience who enjoys the things that we're doing, and they're taking pictures of that and sharing it with their designer friends.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, we have this great mechanism to show what we can do and have other people say like, hey, that looks cool. I want some of that next time.
And to be a part of it.
Yeah. And we've literally seen names in the comments of Instagram Instagram photos saying like, oh, I hope I can go next year. And next year or a few years later, they're there.
Yeah.
So you can see like a direct return on investment.
Yeah.
That's kind of like a thrill to see.
Well, and to see these, and you can see some pictures in the show notes and probably on your site as well, but these are beautifully handmade pieces from all the years you've done. I mean, you make hundreds of them, and in some cases even 1,000 of them, and you make all of them in sometimes your backyard or in whatever office space you're creating, and so everyone who picks it up gets the experience of having a personalized handmade item for them. And obviously to take a photo of that and put it on Instagram makes total sense why they would do that.
Yeah, and also something that we do is that at the very beginning of the conference, so like 9 a.m. when we say, hey, welcome everyone to a brand new conference, we do a little 10-minute explanation of what we did.
Yeah.
And what we've gotten good at is we document everything we do. So we'll set up a little camera, put it on play, on record, and we just go to work for the next 2-3 hours, and we do that for every step of the process.
Yeah.
So people literally see all the work that went into it, and they just love it because it's not just a finished product that magically appear there, but two people, in the morning, at night, hungry, not hungry, in the sun, in the rain, like they're doing this. And I think that has a huge value for people.
Oh, yeah. And I think that you tapped into something like we heard Jay Bear talking a couple weeks ago about like a talk trigger, something to trigger conversation about the thing you went to, and therefore have someone else say, oh my gosh, that's so cool. A, because it is cool, but B, it also helps to share the word about the thing that you're doing and you're up to. And that's
cool. And then I think going back to Jay's presentation about having talk triggers and figuring out what those are, I think our talk triggers, like we want people to go, those guys are crazy.
That's cool because of how much effort you put into it and how much you do.
Yep.
That's awesome.
How many hours you logged into it, and,
yeah.
And to make this thing, no, I definitely cannot put this in the trash.
Yeah. Well, recording it and being able to tell the story is really smart too, because you have the story there. Now, you've had some failures in that process, I would imagine. Are there a couple of ideas that you had that just didn't work?
Well, I think we had, so specifically about the brand new conference, we thought we had the idea of doing it in Europe in 2016. And we thought, well, we have a big audience on the blog. And people always email us saying like, oh, I wish I could go, but it's so far away. I'm in Europe. You should do one in Europe.
Yeah.
So one day we do it in Europe.
Yeah.
We spend a lot of money and only 300. I think we only sold 300 tickets. We gave away like 100 just to get the room filled up.
Right.
So we overestimated the audience.
Yeah.
We later learned that it was too expensive for Europeans. Like Europeans don't want to pay more than 100 euros for
so
design conference, and our ticket price was like 500 euro, which it was like 400 or 500 euro.
Yeah.
And like in the US, a design conference for 2-3 day conference is like $1,000. So we're still way under the market price. But we ended up losing $50,000. A little bit of our pride went with it. But it was something that we wanted to do, and if we had never tried it, it would have been like, maybe we would never know. But now we know.
Yeah.
Well, and we consider doing it again, saying, because we don't get defeated very easily.
Yeah.
And so we went to Barcelona and scouted a theater and booked it and everything. And then we got cold feet when Barcelona was having some political unrest and not knowing what the economy was going to do on our end over here with presidency changes and all that. We got cold feet and we canceled it.
Yeah.
But, and we don't discount ever doing it again. I think we learned some very hard lessons, and processes that can be improved.
Yeah.
But it will have to wait for a while.
Well, it's funny. Like, it seems like those failures are always a step towards some new success, right? And so that didn't work. But you already just in this conversation explained 2 or 3 reasons why that you totally understood, and so it makes sense that you could pretty easily come around and find success in that same idea of taking it to Europe or maybe some other great place.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that works for us is not being afraid of failure.
Mm-hmm.
We take a lot of risks, and if it doesn't work, we just, dust our feet and move on.
Mm-hmm.
We don't take failure hard, but we try to learn from it.
I think that came across when I saw the process of you creating one of the Chicago bag and badge scenarios where you went through all these iterations and failed and failed and failed and looked and failed and didn't stop and didn't quit and didn't give up, and ultimately had for the conference when it went off a beautiful both badge and bag that you could, as the viewer of that story that you all recorded and told, it was so easy to see how hard you had worked, and it really motivated me as well, failure is just a part of the process. It's just a step in the process in a lot of ways,
Yeah, I think it's always sad when you fail, and it's almost become a cliche that you have to fail and failing is good. But yeah, I would just say that it does suck to fail, and it feels horrible, and but it really is about how you bounce back from that and what you learn from it. But yeah, I wouldn't discount the right to feel disappointed and to feel sad and that maybe what you're doing is not right. So I think all that process of self-doubt is actually really helpful to either help you recommit to what you're doing, or say screw it. That was enough. I don't want to experience that again. And move on. So it's I think there's something interesting about failing and how that beyond the cliche, how do you actually embrace that or let it drive what you do next.
Folks want to find you, where can they do so?
Underconsideration.com, and from there you can go to the different ventures that we have. On Instagram and Twitter, we're at UCLLC. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Don't call us because we were terrible on the phone.
Okay, well, thank you again to both of you for coming.
Thank you for having us.
Special thanks to Armin Vit and Bryony Gomez-Palacio for taking the time to share the Under Consideration story with us. This show was produced and edited by me, Jeremy Goodrich. The music is by my high school buddy, Mark Vinton. In college, Mark and I were far from neat freaks, but when Mark decided to clean, it was a whole thing. Hours were spent, couches were overturned, and old, moldy food crumbs of all kinds were exposed. It was a spectacle worthy of note, and celebrated heavily when it was complete. If you enjoyed this podcast, there are a couple of things we need you to do right now. First, subscribe to Scratch Entrepreneur on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you listen to podcasts so you can hear future episodes as soon as we release them. While you're there, please give the show a review. We'd love to know what you liked, what you didn't, and what you want to hear next. Until the next time, we truly appreciate you listening.